Well, welcome back to another episode of Theology, where, as usual, I've got my cup of tea and my copy of the Confession. And today we're actually going to finish up with Providence. And so we've seen throughout this section dealing with God's providence that it's not a bare permission, but rather God is active. We've seen how God orchestrates events in the life of believers, whether that's for chastising them and growing them in grace, or whether that's a humbling and helping them to find more dependence upon Him. We've also seen how God orchestrates the actions to bring temporal judgment in times on the wicked. And so we saw throughout the scriptures, especially the instance of Pharaoh, and there's other examples there that you can reference. And so today we conclude that section on providence. And as we've been seeing, the confession is attempting to be very pastoral, it tries to deal with theology in a way that's applicable to us and helps us, which is one of the reasons I think it is such a good confession of faith. So here we are at the end of chapter 5 with section 7. As the providence of God does, in general, reach to all creatures, so after a most special manner it takes care of his church and disposes all things to the good thereof. Wonderful way to conclude this chapter on providence, that God is in control of all things, directing all things. Here we see at the end that the goal is for the good and the protection of his church. And again, this is just something the Bible testifies to, right? That God sent his Son into the world to save his people, and that Jesus testifies to the fact that the gates of Hades or the gates of hell will not overtake his church. The church is the body of Christ, and so it is Christ's body. He, as the great king, defends and protects his church. And again, as we saw, this is the end, so that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be times of trials and struggles. There certainly is for the church today, as there has been throughout history. The church has found difficult and trying times, but God is using all of that for the good of the church. And I think that's the operative word here, is the church. Not the individual believer, but the church, the individual believer brought and incorporated into this larger group. And that is where our hope and our trust is. So I would encourage you at the end of this section here, if you're not part of a good gospel preaching church, to find one and to be incorporated into, and to look joyfully to that time in the future when we can start meeting again as churches physically present together. So a small section, but a lot to teach on. And that brings us to the end of chapter 5 with the confession. So I do hope you have a good day today. Enjoy your cup of tea. This one is nice and has cooled down a lot, so should not be nearly as hot as it often is. So cheers.